let's talk about ways that you can add color to your tracks. Now eventually we're going to get into the effects and we're going to go into video effects, and there are all kinds of adjustments that you can add, just like in Photoshop where I could change the saturation or the color tint. But I'm going to show you another way right now because it allows us to start talking about opacity and layering tracks. What we're going to do is we're going to create basically just a solid color, and we're going to have it on the track above our video and then lower that opacity so it kind of blends in. Again, it's really similar to something you might do in Photoshop. So to do this, I'm going to go up to File and then choose New, and I'm going to go down to where it says Color Matte. And it's asking me what size I want it to be, and by default it's going to pick the same size as your project, so you almost always want to keep that. And we're going to click OK. And now, just like in Photoshop, I have the color picker, and so this slides here where I can choose my range of hues here. So let's say I want to have something in the reds, or I'm going to choose this. And then the second step is I pick the color by clicking into here, and I can see that isolated color here. And if I'm happy with it, I click OK, and I can put in a name if I want, or I could change the name and click OK. And it's now been placed in our project pane as like a clip. And so I could click and drag this and put it into the timeline. I'm going to put it into the track above, and I should shrink mine down. This is the way yours is going to look, kind of on the small side. I can extend and make it longer, which you probably want to do. Now if I take my scrubber, so I'm going to put it over these two clips. Maybe I have this section where I want it to become red. If I put my scrubber over, you can see that I can't see what's underneath because this is completely 100% opaque and it's covering this up. So there are a couple of methods of how you could lower the opacity. First, we're going to do it directly on the clip. I'm going to extend the height of this clip. So again, I'm just right over here, and when I hover at the gray bar above, then I get the double arrow, and that allows me to click and drag and extend the height. Once I've extended the height, you can see that there's this line going across, and that controls my opacity. I can click on that line and drag it down, and the number you see there is my opacity. So I'm going to drag it down to like about 30. And now you can see that it has the effect of just kind of tinting my clips instead of being completely opaque. So now I may want this like sudden jump to red, but if I don't, two things I could do. I can select this clip, just click and drag over, it's selected, and I can do Control D or Shift D, actually you can do either one, and that's going to give us that fade in effect and the fade down. So we talked about that in an earlier video about how you normally do that to your clips. Shift D will put it on both of them, on both the video and the audio. And the other way I could do it, so I'm going to do Control Z a couple of times and get rid of that. The other way you can do it, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit more, so plus, is I can manually put in keyframes, which means they're like anchor points so that my opacity starts down at 0 and then it goes up to 30. I'm going to do that by hovering on this bar, and I'm going to hold the Control key down. You see a little plus sign that appears on my arrow, and I'm going to click, and that gives me an anchor point. Now if I just drag, that anchor points allows me to drag, but as you can see I'm dragging the whole line down, and I just want it to slope up. So I'm going to move about down here, and I'm going to put in another control point, and now I can take my first one and drag it down. So this red starts out with 0% opacity here, and then it scrolls up to the level that I have set it here with this control point. Now I'm going to use the wheel on my mouse to scroll down the timeline, and I'll do the same thing here. Add an anchor point by holding Control and clicking, and another one at the end, and then I'm going to drag this down. And now I'll use the backslash key on my keyboard to shrink everything up and go with the scrubber, and you can see that it gives me kind of that same effect of that I had when I used the automatic dissolve. So, and if I hit the space bar on my keyboard, it just plays for me. And if I hit space bar again, it stops. Okay, so that's just kind of like a cool thing that you could do if you wanted to add a lot of color, if you wanted to bring color into one of your projects through this tinting method. And you can make it very extreme. You know, I could add more peaks here. I could make it this spot where like it becomes like intensely red and then it kind of fades away. You know, it's just kind of like fun stuff to add. While you're here, if you go up into the top left-hand section, if you're still in the editing mode, and you pull up the panel for effects control, and you open up, let's see, where it says opacity, and then you'll see that there are all of these anchor points here. So when we made our adjustments here on our clip, we were actually also making adjustments here in the effects control. But we'll talk about that later, and a lot of the ways that we'll be adjusting our clips will be in the effects control, but I thought for this first time, maybe it's a good idea we can just start here on the clip itself. Lastly, I just want to point out, just like in Photoshop layers, I'm kind of assuming everyone's taken a Photoshop class before, but if you haven't, and something I'm saying doesn't make sense, just let me know. Over here in the beginning of our control parts for our timeline, you have things like the eyeball. So if I want to see what this looks like without my red or anything that's on this track, I just click on the eyeball and it temporarily turns the visibility off here. And you could do the same thing for audio. You could mute something, so no audio on this track would play. Or let's say I had a bunch of audio tracks and I just wanted to hear one of them. Instead of turning off a whole bunch, you can choose the solo option, which would solo this and it would actually mute everything else. I'll just drag some others down. So in that case, everything else would be muted, and only this one, but I don't have to manually go and mute them. So that's kind of a cool feature. All right, have some fun with these things, and let me know if you have questions.